Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hairenik Media's Summer Digest. I'm your host, Alison Tamizian-Muse, and I'm here with our Yerevan correspondent, Nari Navasardian. Just a little reminder before we get started, I'd like to ask you all to subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X, wherever you get your news. Let's get started. So, Azerbaijan has again threatened war against Armenia. From the press, Azerbaijan threatened this past Thursday to take large-scale military action against Armenia in response to what it called provocations by Armenia along the border. It also denounced Armenia's flirtation with Western security assistance and said that the, quote, military exercises conducted by the United States in Armenia, the provision of lethal weapons by France to Armenia, and the EU's allocation of 10 million euros in military aid to Yerevan amount to new provocations, it said, and inspire occupying Armenia, actually, to resort to new provocations. So it's calling Armenia an occupying power. It said, quote, Armenia and its sponsors should refrain from creating a new hotbed of war in the South Caucasus. So that's a pretty serious threat, loaded with some serious accusations, including that Armenia is an occupying power on its own territory. So is this threat being taken seriously from what we observe in recent days in Armenia?
Well, certainly not by this current administration, because we see they went on month-long vacation. A few key people in the office went at the same time, which is not really something that you should allow yourself. Or if you are a few months away from war, you shouldn't go on month-long vacation, period, or on vacation. So, and then as soon as Prime Minister Pashinyan returned, he went to this festival. He started just, visiting random entertainment sites. So I don't think that there's any messaging to the Armenian population that Azerbaijan's threats are anything to be taken seriously. Which every time that Azerbaijan attacks, and it has been every year since 2020, I think for a lot of people it comes as a bit of a shock. Because, of course, their own government is saying that, okay, give away this and no more attacks, and now that and no more attacks. But the attacks, they just keep coming, and we just keep conceding and conceding and conceding, and there is no real end in sight. And as for the formulation occupying power, this is clear that if Armenia were to backtrack on Artsakh self-determination, it would then de facto become an occupying power. It would admit itself and put itself in the shoes of an occupying power. Because, okay, so if you're not fighting for self-determination within the confines of international law, then what are you effectively doing?
I think we also need to again remind our audience that Azerbaijan at the presidential level refers to Armenia as Western Azerbaijan. Speaking to how serious these authorities take that, it's, they seem to push this idea implicitly that Azerbaijan Aliyev is just, full of bluster. He's just playing to his own home audience. He's just trying to act like a tough guy at home, but this is not a serious thing, that we're on track. We're sticking to this peace process. And there's really no major response to Azerbaijan claiming all of Armenia as Western Azerbaijan. But I think that's another way we could explain the language of calling Armenia an occupier. They may well, if we take their statements seriously, they're saying that Armenians are occupying Armenia.
Yes.
Or in their words, Western Azerbaijan. The foreign ministry responded to Azerbaijan's threats. The foreign ministry of Armenia, the spokeswoman said that Yerevan remains committed to its peace agenda and will not deviate from this strategy. Apparently, no matter what Azerbaijan does, Armenia, tries to play dumb and pretend this is not happening. They keep going to various European capitals, saying, guys, we're all on the same page, right? We all believe in international law, right? These are our sovereign borders, right? And yet these same authorities, what they do on the ground is keep giving up concessions to Azerbaijan from areas where people actually have property deeds. People have paid taxes for years. We've just seen in Tavush how Azeris actually reaped the crops that Armenians had planted the last season. So on the ground, they keep giving concessions. They keep thinking this is going to solidify, or they say they believe that it's going to solidify Armenia's sovereign territory, and yet everything we've seen in practice since 2020 points the opposite direction. So I don't know what else to add about that, because...
Well, I think it's just important to note also that there is no such thing as manufacturing consent among your internal audience if you're not actually planning to do anything. Because what Aliyev has just done is all this propaganda that they employed against Nagorno-Karabakh. They've just transferred it to this Western Armenia idea. Because of course all this energy, this nationalism, and even the fascism, the Azeri fascism, it cannot just go away, right? It's a gradual process that Azerbaijan, Baku Republic, has in no way entered. Instead, they have just shifted the goalpost to getting Armenia.
Certainly. And the Armenian foreign minister actually said in recent days that our proposals of creating mechanisms regarding border incidents and arms control remain open. And of course, Azerbaijan is not interested in this at all. And why should they be?
To be honest, this was the case even before the Artsakh Republic giveaway. Back in 2017, when I was discussing the situation with some authorities of Artsakh Republic, they were telling me as well that Azerbaijan just refuses to have any type of monitoring, so that then later they will not even have to answer for starting aggression or attacks. So they have always been against any type of mechanism of international control. And it is understandable that when you have such a strategic location strategic for America, right, between Russia and Iran, and you're such an important part of this Turkish belt that America wants between those two countries, then of course, and you have the oil for EU, this is very important, then of course you are more important and can just do much more. You can allow yourself much more. And Armenia is just the little first step for them.
I think we should also mention in recent days, the Turkish president, Erdogan, made a threat to Israel. He said we can do what we did in Karabakh and in Libya, which meaning, lead an invasion and occupy. Of course, this is against the backdrop of Israel's war on Gaza. This is against the backdrop of Israel facing charges for genocide. And I think, the elephant in the room is that Turkey provides 40% of Israel's oil supply. It goes from Azerbaijan via Turkey to Israeli ports. And Erdogan is notorious for whenever he needs to play up, the leader of the Islamic world card, he will use racist slurs against Jews. He will call out Israel. He will sound like, he's ready to go to war the next day. But of course, we know that he always has a limit, and that limit is usually with the rhetoric. And this whole war, that oil supply has never stopped. In fact, it's a lifeline for Israel. So actually, the Al Monitor reporter Amber Zaman actually said on her Twitter account and said, almost laughing, that this is very typical Erdogan and he's never going to do anything. It's just for, this kind of populist consumption. And yet, there's still those who think that, this is going to be what makes the West break with Turkey, and Turkey's going to get kicked out of NATO because, Erdogan threatened Israel. They haven't been paying attention to how Erdogan operates and how he and Netanyahu have always managed their relationship, even when it's at rock bottom.
That's another thing. Usually people like that, NATO should leave, Turkey should be kicked out of NATO people. They think that Turkey flirting sometimes with Russia, for example, or trying to, have rhetorical, face-offs with Israel. They think that Turkey does this because the relationship between Turkey and America is in such a dire condition. But in reality, Turkey is just way too strategic, way too important. I don't even know if Israel is more important than Turkey for America in the Middle East. So they do it not despite America, but because they know that they can push this limit to.
Certainly. I just wanted to shift gears slightly, although this does involve a regional country. There's talk, this is not, it's not officially confirmed yet, but Air Arabia, which had gone into a partnership with the Armenian government to create a low-cost airline called FlyOne, there's word that they're considering launching legal proceedings. Why? Why don't you talk a little bit about FlyOne, how it was born, and what's going on that might make this story come to pass?
FlyOne was launched to this big fanfare, right, like a few years ago. And it was supposed to be, I think it was 50% the Armenian government, and
I believe 51% the Armenian government, and 49% this Emirati carrier Air Arabia, which is based, I believe, in Sharjah.
Yes, and I think Tigran Avinyan, the current mayor of Yerevan, was in charge of that. He was either director or the head of FlyOne. And it was, I think, one of the first projects by this Armenian National Fund.
Yes, so Armenia's Sovereign Wealth Fund. It was a debut sovereign wealth fund for Armenia, launched in 2019 by Prime Minister Pashinyan as kind of a flagship thing. Sovereign wealth funds, usually it's countries that might have oil and gas resources to manage. They want to make sure that it's the money, the proceeds from that are invested properly for the future of the country and its citizens. Norway is an example. Even Azerbaijan has, I believe, 2 sovereign wealth funds. So Armenia decided to launch one, or Pashinyan decided to launch one. One of the, hallmark companies was going to be FlyOne.
Mm-hmm.
And yet.
And now it's gone.
And now it's gone. Not only is FlyOne gone, it was announced, in the past 3 months or less, that the entire Sovereign Wealth Fund, which was known by the acronym ANIF, the Armenian National Interest Fund, has just simply been dissolved. And I heard about this from a friend who works in fintech in the US, and he said, Allison, this doesn't happen. You might lose 20%, you might have a really bad year with your investments, but for a fund to launch and then just simply dissolve less than 5 years later, and all of those investments are just, gone, our, tax money just evaporated. So that doesn't happen. This is extremely bizarre. In normal circumstances, this is something that should bring down a government. And it's just one of these stories that's just, everyone is so overwhelmed by the general atmosphere that it's under the radar. And at the same time, we have very the physical threats of war from Azerbaijan. And the prime minister and his partner were just in Gyumri for a concert. You mentioned earlier, and I thought that was very interesting, that Pashinyan actually wrote in his book
Yeah, he did.
About this theme.
Yeah, in his book, Pashinyan is like, the worst kind of war is the one you don't see, the war that is drowned in festivity, the sound of laughter and festivities and celebrations. Something along those lines. And he was talking about, the mothers of martyrs, wives of martyrs. So I think that's a little bit creepy.
Fascinating. I think that his book must be translated into all relevant languages for the diaspora, for people to truly comprehend
His sick mind.
the mind of the man. Okay, so I've just pulled up an article from the Prime Minister's website for the launch of FlyOne. Was launched in 2022. Yes, so Tigran Avinian was the chairman of the board of the State Interest Fund of Armenia, or they use the acronym ANIF, the Armenian National Interest Fund.
Yeah, they pressed him recently about it. It's like, oh, weren't you seeing the reports? Weren't you demanding reports? And he just gave a non-answer. It's like, yeah, it was something.
Yeah, that's become very typical, this total impunity, even when it comes to billions just thrown away, apparently. And also at the time, Tatevik Ravazian was the chairwoman of the Civil Aviation Committee, and she had been really, when I first arrived to Armenia, was talked up, oh, the youngest woman civil aviation chief, wow, how exciting.
Youngest woman to concede to Azerbaijan.
Youngest woman to fail at running a civil aviation committee. Didn't she go and speak at that
Fuck up nights.
fuck up nights?
Yeah, as if like this is just a fuck up, like ha 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 ha. Accidentally joined like a party of traitors, haha. For her,
But she
it
was
like
talking
this.
about the leading the civil aviation committee, and I mean the results are we can all see. I mean, for those who are not in Armenia or not, flying these kind of new whatever group of domestic airlines, FlyOne it was created. It had investment from the Emirates, which is well known around the world for the quality and, dependability of its airlines. That was, totally thrown away. I don't know if they would work with Armenia again after this experience. And then, of course, we have FlyOne, which maybe you can speak a little bit about that airline and some of the horror stories and its owner.
FlyOne belongs to Khachatur Sukhasyan, the current MP. Is this allowed? Like, can they just own airlines? Like, is this okay? Or was there no limitation for politicians and business?
I don't know. I mean, in the US, that's also a line. I think that, maybe, how do you divest from your stocks? Should you have to? It's definitely, I think that in most countries, if it's not regulated, there's at least always kind of a gentleman's agreement that, you don't but you shouldn't benefit from what you're able to influence as an elected member of government. And yet, this government, which came to power, promising an end to corruption. I mean, this guy, Hacıdor Sukyasin, he's so notorious that he has a nickname, right?
Yes.
He's known as Giro, and he's actually from the once demoted oligarchs of Levante Petrosyan's time, who have made a comeback, right?
Yes, and he wants to turn Sevan into Antalya. It's like, wouldn't it be great if we just have Turks come in and transform all the shore of Sevan, open up all their lula kebab places?
Did he say he'd like Sevan to become like Antalya?
I don't know in public, but a friend of mine, he knows Gırzo, and so I just know that he thinks it's a great idea.
I mean, I think that it's not so strange because this government has made clear that they want to open the border with Turkey. They want to have normalized relations with Azerbaijan. They do, at least a lot of them seem to really buy into this idea that Armenia can be sort of a, Las Vegas on this Turkish roadway. And that as long as they have, the West, that it's not going to be, they'll at least be able to keep making money. They're not going to have their lives interrupted. And that, war, for the most part, even if they give away Syunik, Tavush, Tigranashen, there's no road to Iran, no sovereign road to Georgia, but they will be able to make their money on their, Indian reservation, so to speak. And yet,
well, this is what they don't understand is Turks and Azerbaijanis, they're never going to believe this new type of Armenia. They're never going to believe that Armenia is going to stay this course. Unless Armenia is not really inhabited by Armenians anymore, unless Armenians are not Armenians anymore, and the education system has completely changed, and the state system, the constitution has been changed. That's what they should know about, is that they might hate nationalists just like Turks, but the Turks hate them like they hate Armenian nationalists.
And, we kind of went through the list of all of the sort of facts on the ground that they're trying to establish so that when this government is out of power or their people are out of power and a new pro-Armenian government takes over, that what they inherit will be so difficult to come back from, so disjointed that they will find it extremely challenging, if not impossible, to rebuild from. That's what is happening. And we've seen that from, the demands on the constitution, so the actual legal framework that Armenia is based on, especially, regarding Artsakh self-determination, regarding the genocide, regarding guaranteed citizenship for diasporans. These are all things that, of course, if Pashinyan manages to meet Aliyev's demands, are all out, or they're going to be watered down to the point where they can de facto make it impossible to pursue any of those.
Armenian Apostolic Church.
Of course, the role of the Armenian Apostolic Church, recognized rightfully as this carrier of Armenian heritage and put above any other faith. This is also something they want to take aim at. And it goes from there to the school textbook, which they're working to re-engineer the history. This is a piece that we've been working on for a long time, of course, and will be forthcoming. But why don't you briefly mention some of the changes that they're trying to instill in the young generation?
Well, I think the main shift is that Armenia is going from this idea of itself as Armenia, Artsakh diaspora to just being the Republic of Armenia. It's like citizenship-based patriotism that is being pushed. Just the same as France, essentially, right? So anybody can come, and if they pay now, I think they wanted to make it paid. You can buy your way to citizenship now.
In Armenia?
Yes. So you buy citizenship, and there you go. You're already Armenian. You don't have to do any of this other things that Armenians do. Like, for example, like oppose Turkey, demand justice for genocide, fight Azerbaijan, all this.
Enlist your child in the army.
Yes. So this is their aim, to just have this be a faceless space. And they're really pushing this. For example, even in the map from the ancient times, they just put Azerbaijan there to sort of consolidate, to get Armenians used to the idea that, this is Azerbaijan and its borders. And Artsakh, the borders are not even mentioned, and it's written as NagornoKarabakh.
And we should mention that this was a very weird thing that the book author did. He transposed the modern, states, including, Azerbaijan as Azerbaijan wants it to be, onto an ancient map in which Azerbaijan still didn't exist. So it's a very, ahistorical thing to do in a history book, and yet they're doing it to kind of indoctrinate these kids into thinking, oh, they were always there. And maybe, we have no claim to Artsakh. We have no link to Artsakh, even though Artsakh was where the first school for the Armenian script was founded. And of course, this goes hand in hand with what Azerbaijan's doing, bulldozing villages, bulldozing cemeteries, like they did in Nakhichevan, they're just like in Nakhichevan, they're repeating this process. In Artsakh, they're also, changing the shape of churches, or just tearing some down entirely, putting mosques. It depends. It's a case-by-case basis, but they're doing as much as they can get away with. And when it comes to Western public opinion that, those who believe in this government think so highly of, there's never going to be a major reaction because, in fact, if we look just at the public statements of the U.S., of other, but mainly the U.S., let's say, because that's the biggest army in NATO, they're not only not condemning, but they are openly saying that the broader picture in the region, which should be worked towards, is to basically expel Russia, hamper Iran, meaning containing them, which I think means, de facto cutting the border between Armenia and Iran, and also harming China. And the thing is, I think, Azerbaijan has been smart in the way that, after one of the U.S. State Department reps was speaking against China, Aliyev actually met with the Chinese and signed an agreement with them. So Armenia is going in lockstep with what the West wants, even though Azerbaijan is not even necessarily on board with all of this and is taking care of themselves. And yet Armenia, just under these authorities, keeps going on this path. And it's left to, and I think this is another thing we should talk about, it's left to just regular people, organizations, non-government organizations, charities, to speak out against what's happening, including even something so basic as the POW file, why don't you talk a little bit about what movement, if any, is going on, the government of Armenia, or, just regular Armenians regarding POWs still held in Baku and essentially hostages, political hostages.
Well, COP29 this year is going to be in Baku, this climate change, the global climate change summit. And there's a campaign against it saying that, you should stop greenwashing genocide, you have to release Armenian POWs, hostages, prisoners, essentially everyone that is still held in Baku prisons, because it is important for Armenians to realize that even if the National Assembly Speaker, Alen Simonian, said, oh, the POWs are essentially dead to me, I don't care about them anymore, on record, this doesn't mean that we, the Armenian people, and the real civil society of Armenia, should forget where Armenian interests are. And the release of the prisoners of war is like an important part of our vision. Not of our vision necessarily, but it's just like one stepping stone, because of course, we released all of their hostages and all their POWs that we had instead of trying to get ours back in exchange. We just gave all Azerbaijanis that were held in our prisons. And recently, even if we catch one, instead of exchanging or negotiating for the exchange, we just give it back.
I certainly support this campaign. I know you do as well, if only for the hostages from the civilian, military, political leadership, and common civilians to know, for their families to know that we didn't forget them, that we care about them, and then we're not living in this artifice, this, we're not unconcerned about their fate. Also, it's very important not only for Aliyev to get pushback, and not be allowed to just greenwash genocide, but for the Armenian authorities to feel some pressure from the society, both at home and the diaspora, that no, we're not okay with this. You can't just send somebody to this conference and pretend that everything's fine. No, we're going to do this campaign and we're going to make it embarrassing for you to go. It's not okay for you to go and just pretend that these people don't exist and they're not your citizens, which they are. Let's talk about the national security chief of Armenia, Armen Grigoryan. He's from Artsakh. He was born in Artsakh Republic. I suppose he has an Artsakh Republic numbered passport, which they've essentially invalidated since the exodus, and claimed that, they've basically denaturalized an entire chunk of the Armenian citizenry. And I'm sure they could do the same. Who knows? Maybe they have a number code for certain places for Syunik, for Tavush. We don't know. We're finding they make it up as they go. But Armen Grigoryan, the Security Council chief, he is one of these passport holders. So how did he get that position? Is he not a citizen of Armenia? What changed? Was he secretly given a different numbered passport? Are the rules just different because he's agreeing as an Artsakhi to be a useful face for them to do this? There's a lot of questions that don't have any good answers as far as I'm concerned. And when it comes to, COP29, I think the main thing is just making this extremely uncomfortable. That's the minimum. Of course, we've heard, there are some Armenians that think, oh, we were told by this Europeans in Munich that Aliyev is planning to release the hostages before COP29. I would love for that to be true, but this is doesn't square with anything. And I think to let people keep getting tortured another hour, another day, is just on this idea that someone told you that they're going to get released later on. I mean, it's frightening. It's
Through
really
the years,
frightening.
we heard a number of this type of myths that were supposed to just pacify people and make them not do anything. It's a very classical story saying, oh, they genocided you, for example, because there was the Ottoman bank raid. Don't protest now for the POWs or they will get mistreated. Oh, you protested in Girans and this is why Azerbaijan noticed. And now they're taking away more. Something along those lines, you know? There's always something that your own government can use. Or not, it's government and also government adjacent or Western adjacent structures. Or even like the local ones. They have all sorts of different layers for different segments of society. So it's just anything that tells you not to do something, not to do the campaign, not to protest, not to, unless, you know, you want the POWs to be mistreated or you want there to be war, you should just tell them, look, I have a state, I have a right to protest, I have a right to do this campaign. I'm doing this campaign, you know. You shouldn't always be looking to Azerbaijan for permission. This is exactly what they want.
Yeah, you can't be walking on eggshells. I think Lapshin said, the kind of a strange character, the Israeli, Russian, Ukrainian citizen who he had gone to Artsakh many times. And he ended up in a Baku prison. He ended up being extradited, I think, by a third country. And he said the only thing that will keep you alive in a Baku prison is if people are making Aliyev look bad. I mean, you know, his story is a little bit different. He had multiple countries that could perhaps advocate for him. But, I mean, the thing is, if we just don't say anything and say, oh, we have to be quiet, and maybe he'll let them out. Oh, maybe he'll just let them out so that, you know, there will be a goodwill gesture. No, that's not how it works. You only need to make a goodwill gesture to look, beneficent and to look civilized if the world is looking at you and saying, this isn't right, this is not civilized. So it's an important campaign. I think, you know, everyone listening should join it exactly wherever they can. Of course, it's going to be mostly social media, but I believe also one of the ideas is that Western journalists should be pressured to raise this topic if they're going to go to Baku. If they're going to go to this conference, they shouldn't be treating it as business as usual, because it's not. So first, for that to happen, there needs to be awareness. These journalists need to know that there are Armenian hostages in Baku, and then they need to at least be armed with some facts so that the Azeris can't just come back and say, oh, well, they're terrorists. Okay. In order to come back and have a follow-up question, you need to know, who are these guys? You need to know how ridiculous that is. But if, you know, some Dutch journalist probably doesn't know who Bako is, right? Or Rashid, but maybe Rupen Vardanyan, and I think that's somewhere to start to build up their knowledge about it. And, you know, I can say, as a journalist who, you know, covered Syria before, if you were ever going to go and report in the government side, some people wouldn't even do it because of the backlash you would get. And if you went, you should do your best to push back against official narratives, to ask about strikes on civilians. You should do everything in your power to, you know, not just look like a stooge. And to be a stooge. And that should be the rule for any context you go into. I don't think there's any country that doesn't have something that you should be checking up on and grilling a leader on, even in the United States. But with Azerbaijan, it's very important that, that we create an awareness so that there can be this pushback, so that we lay the groundwork for there to be pressure, at maximum on Baku, at minimum on the Armenian authorities.
Also, it's interesting that they keep doing this. They keep using this eco-activism as a way to just push their terrible agendas. For example, remember when they started the blockade, they just put a bunch of kids in Lachin saying the mines were harming nature, which is laughable, of course, but it succeeded, right, ultimately.
Yeah, that became the headline. That was the headline because reporters who are outside of the situation wrote, eco-activists block road. You get eco-activist in there. There's only so many other words you can fit in a headline. And, suddenly what's lost is that Armenians are lost. And what's lost is right behind those eco-activists were Turkish special forces and Azeri special forces. And I know because I saw them with my own eyes because I was on the road one of the first times they blocked it. And behind them, I'm not just saying they're Turks, there's a Turkish flag. And they had the high ground. They're looking down. They were in Shushi. They had the high ground. And you're almost like a cliff drop down. And okay, there were the Russian peacekeepers, but the positions were not very enviable. Once the road was handed over, that it made it almost indefensible because handing over Berdzor, which was the last real high ground, just meant that everything else was basically in a valley. And you had to drive through a road that the Azeris had built. I mean, if one day, God willing, we get through this with a country, there's so many investigations and stories that need to come out on why. Why did this happen? Who made those decisions? Who actually thought that was a good idea to hand over not only Berdzor, this critical road, the electricity line, the gas line, the hydroelectric sources that powered Stepanakert, big question marks there. Who actually believed that, if you hand over your own territory, that that Russia, a country that, is watching you do all this and has another war going on in Ukraine, is going to just, from this low ground, from this road, without steady electricity or internet or anything, fight your war for you. In fact, I don't think they were ever meant to, because it's very clear. We see the long-term trajectory. What happened in Artsakh is just being repeated in Tavush, in Tigranashen. More handovers, laying the blame. Now they've stopped laying the blame on the former governments. Now they lay the blame on Russia. Okay. Or they'll even blame, the villagers for protesting, anyone but themselves that are actually taking these actions. And we have what we have. We have these critical heights handed over, roads impassable, and we're getting closer and closer to this situation where we're essentially on a reservation. And people don't feel it yet, but if that road to Georgia finally is under Azeri control, and the road to Iran as well, people will understand there's a link between the land and the airspace, and maybe we won't control our airspace anymore, and these people will still be talking about sovereign territory. And Azerbaijan will say, we never recognized your sovereign territory. You are Western Azerbaijan.
Yes, de facto, they just don't recognize Armenia as a sovereign autonomous state. That has been the problem for a long time, which is understandable, if you're a relatively new entity, like the Republic of Armenia. If your origins are in maybe like Russia wanting to separate the Turkish countries, then you have to assert yourself in the region.
Are you talking about Republic of Azerbaijan?
I'm talking about Republic of Armenia, which is us, right? Yes, the reason why we got Sunik was ultimately because they wanted to divide these two Turkish countries. They knew that back in the day too, Turkey was already like arming Azerbaijan, like that it was strategic for Azerbaijan to Sovietize first, etc. So Armenia, instead of trying to be groomed and be invested in by a country that has nothing to do with its origins, because this is the logic of a country, you know. You have to understand why you're here, for which reasons you became this like Christian ethno-state in the middle of this.
Well, who's interested naturally in you surviving?
Yes.
And
where did they feel the weakness to like put you there to create a state? So you shouldn't stray from these origins. For example, Israelis, they always lobby Americans, right? And they never lobby Russians because they know that their origins are with like the Anglo-American world. So now with Armenia too, if you're a new, relatively new state, you have a problem of asserting yourself. You're not in a position to act like, oh, well, yes, you know, I have all this like freedom to just give away land, to just give away, to have people just leave en masse, which they do every year. No.
And now they want to launch a visa facilitation with the EU, so...
So even more people will leave, just like it happened in Georgia. Georgia is even a worse position than us demographically. And I think a big factor is that they had EU visa liberalization. So this is just true, you know, like not everyone in the region will acknowledge you unless you make yourself useful. And making yourself a tool of these like foreign faraway powers is not a good way to be ingrained, to make yourself useful, to be incorporated and assert yourself in the region.
Well, right now we have the worst of both worlds, right? Because we have, okay, we're cutting ourselves from Russia. We don't want any help from Iran. They just denied that there was any military deal with Iran that was, you know, came out. And are going to the West, but what is the West? Okay, these drills with the United States. If anyone wants to look at the videos, it's all open source. It's on defense sites. You can register and download them. These drills were riot policing drills, effectively. You can see plastic shields and batons, and it seems like they're preparing for the next stage of Armenian social unrest, which we saw how that was met. The movement that began in Tavush, arrived to Yerevan, ended in bloodshed, at least this round. The police fired stun grenades into the crowds, into the area where the media were filming. Just total impunity, to the point that it even was flagged by monitors that usually are praising Armenia for democracy or just, you know, staying silent and saying, oh, we don't have enough information. Amnesty International called for an investigation into this extreme use of force. Reporters Without Borders said it was appalling that stun grenades had been fired at the press. And yet, you know, as we know, there was no condemnation from these Western governments that support Pashinyan. And instead, we see a return of these trainers who are not from, you know, not really it's not the Green Berets coming. This is the Kansas National Guard, which, you know, even though the U.S. has deployed the National Guard to different war theaters, traditionally, the National Guard was just reservist and are more kind of a, you know, they usually stay at home. So to have, instead of it being the Marines, but the Kansas National Guard coming, training the Armenian military with plastic shields. That is, and they called it. They didn't put any veneer on it. The United States didn't. While the Armenian side called it a military drill, the United States said this is riot policing, crowd control, and checkpoint, practices. So what's that for? That's for policing the Armenian public. That is for repressing us, when we don't like what's happening, when they're giving away people's land. And that's for, training Armenian internal security forces to do checkpoints and basically, search their own people so that this road that even the Armenian authorities say is going to at first be for third country citizens, not for Armenians. This Turkish belt is going to be secure for hostile powers. So that's what's happening here. The U.S. is not, giving us the aid to be able to not only go on the offensive, but not even really for the defensive, I think we should say. So this is really the worst of both worlds because we're cutting ourselves off from traditional partners and not getting anything in return unless your ideology and the ideology of these authorities is that that's the role they want to play. They want to be Azerbaijan and Turkey's policemen here and just serve that role. And this kind of goes back to the role, of probably some Armenians played a century ago, perhaps. Or we can even look into different contexts. We can look at American history. We can look at how they co-opted different Native American tribes, how some tribes who were, basically agreed to make deals, make treaties. They could, disarm them. They can put them in a reservation here while being able to turn their attention to the tribes that wouldn't concede, that wouldn't, give up. I mean, this is colonialism, you can say. And it's interesting because this is, I think, a hot topic in the U.S. now, with the new generation talking about what was done wrong in our history. And it's very painful, I think, to see Armenia, see this as somehow modernity because the U.S. is, leading us down this path when in fact you're just serving as a local enforcer for colonial powers, namely the countries that don't want you to exist.
Exactly.
I think that's enough for our audience to chew on. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back with you again in a week. And be sure again to subscribe to Hairenik at Hairenik on YouTube. And you can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X. Thank you, Nari, and be well until we meet again.
See you later.